All right. Well, welcome. Welcome to our art talk with Alyson Provax. We're going to get started here in a few minutes. I have a few announcements before we get into the art talk and hear more about her amazing work. My name is Michelle Raymond, and I am the director of Archer Gallery in Clark Art Talks at Clark College. I'm so excited to be here today with you all, and it's so nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. And I hope you continue kind of coming back to these Zoom events throughout the next few months. So a few things to note. Our programming obviously is all remote right now. Zooms, everything's on our website. So archergallery.space is kind of where you want to go to check out our new exhibitions and our art talks. We have 9 art talks every year. And we just had one on Wednesday, so some of you were there for that, which is great. I think our next one is October 27th, and that's with Felicita Norris, who is a fantastic figurative painter from the Bay Area. She went to Stanford and teaches at Berkeley, so I'm really excited to have her in a few weeks. And then after Alyson's show in November, we're going to have Laura Kim, who is a digital artist and performance artist. So that should be a really fantastic exhibition at our website as well. And then beyond that, I want to say some thank yous. Thank you, of course, to my amazing colleagues in the art department. I wouldn't be here without you all. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Grant, Katharina, Sensini. Everyone's just been so supportive and really encouraging about these programs. And I just love you all so much. You're so fabulous. And then I want to say thank you as well to the ASCC, the Associated Students of Clark College, for their funding and for their support, especially Darcy Fighter, who has just been a dream to work with and just like the best help I could ever possibly imagine. And I need a lot of help, and she's just been there every single time. So thank you, Darcy, if you're here. You're amazing. And then obviously I want to say thank you so much to Alyson for being here today. It is such an honor, and it's been such a pleasure working with you these last few months. Just kind of a dream person to kind of work with going into this first exhibition virtually this year. So thank you so much for being so easy to work with and being just such a great artist and friend. So thanks. Beyond that, I just want to introduce her a little bit more professionally beyond just my glowing personal reviews of working with her. So Alyson is a celebrated Portland artist, and obviously showing right now through November 8th with us. But in the past, she has shown nationally and internationally, including the Blue Project Foundation in Barcelona, and AIR Gallery and the Untitled Space in New York. She has also shown her work more regionally at Up 4 Gallery in Portland, Wolf Gallery in Portland, and most recently in the Bay Area with the Montalvo Art Center. Her work has been seen on billboards across Seattle, and her work has been published in New York Magazine, Newsweek, and Art Slant. So all over the place, really fabulous work. It's my pleasure today to host her for this art talk and reception. And if you would all help me welcome her with a little bit of clapping, we'll get started with her talk. Thanks, Alyson, for being here.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you to Archer Gallery and Clark College. This has been such a dream to be working on this project in such an interesting time to be trying to think about having an art show in a way that isn't necessarily how we've thought about it in the past. So I have a slideshow presentation here for you today for this show. So I guess we'll just start. I've called the show Out of Nothing. And and so that comes from Latin ex nihilo, which when it's phrased as ex nihilo nihil fit, nothing comes from nothing. The universe was formed from eternal matter. Also, sort of to me, I guess, sort of thinks about things coming out of nowhere or the void. So So that's sort of where I'm starting here. And I'd like to start with this piece from the show that I sort of made earlier this year in the winter. And this is a letterpress on Kirikata, which is a really thin Japanese paper that doesn't have any sizing in it, that I've then erased. And so it's sort of, the paper doesn't take well to erasing. It shows the erasing. And so that was sort of something that I discovered as like an inherent quality of this that I wanted to like really explicitly work with in this piece, instead of it being necessarily like a negative of you can't get rid of things, to try to look at it as this representation of something where, a mistake can't be corrected. You can't necessarily go back. It just sort of gives you this, the fibers pulling up. So.
I love this piece so much, Alyson. Like, we've talked about this many times, but my initial feeling about this was that it felt like skin and bruising on skin.
Yeah.
And I just kind of love that sentiment. It feels so figurative and so human in so many ways, so fleshy.
Yeah. Well, and that paper too, the Kirikata paper is like really, it's really smooth and soft too. It has a sort of tactile feeling like skin. So yeah.
Kind of like onion skin or something.
Yeah. Oh, jumping ahead a little. So this piece is also on that same Kirikata paper, but obviously sort of doing something a little different with it. This piece is crumpled and then printed. And so those, using the wrinkles as another deliberate mark and another way of sort of trying to work with, it doesn't become fully illegible, but it sort of adds some sense of destruction to the piece, and the text is breaking apart a bit. And so the text for this piece came from a letter that my grandmother had written to relatives in Chicago after she moved from Chicago to California with my dad and aunts and uncles and grandpa. And, in the tone of her letter, I was reading that letter this summer, and in there it was meant sort of lightly, but obviously that phrase stuck out to me in a different sort of way this summer when I was sort of looking at it as being related back to the pandemic. And I think that when anything changes, when you move, when you go through a global pandemic, when there's anything like more major like that, it's like hard not to think about things that you could have done differently. There's a sense that maybe like things that you thought that you would do in the future have been cut off in a certain way. It sort of means a couple different things to me there. And I think that also the isolation of this year has like heightened the emotional intensity of our experiences in a certain way. So that sort of played into it too. So, it's this sort of fracturing of these experiences. And then because this is a digital show, I guess not a purely digital show, and because this is a show that exists in part in the digital space and in part as these mailed components, when I was thinking about digital work and we were sort of talking about what else we could do with the show, what would the website images look like, I was thinking about animated Gifs as something that are sort of native to the digital space, and also something that I'd been using as like a communication tool from a distance, sending people Gifs by text as a way to sort of like keep those conversations feeling personal in a certain way. So this piece, it sort of goes back to that erasing of the first piece. It's on a different type of paper. This is a paper that's made with silk fibers, so it sort of has a different type of destruction there, right? And it also, I scanned the relics of the erasing with it, so you get all of the marks, and it sort of makes it obvious that it's something that's being sort of taken away in a certain way there.
I think when you sent this to me, Alyson, like maybe because we started working on this show together in like June, I think. And, I wasn't sure how everything was going to translate, because at the time it was just the text still images. And when you brought this gift to me, I think this was the first one, I just remember just being like blown away. I was like, this is it. This is the vision for the show, is like these animated GIFs. And it felt like it came to life, like everything that you were saying and everything that you were feeling and all the things I was feeling. And then I knew that other people were feeling. This is what, the animation, I think, is what gave it such life. Yeah, it feels like it's living and breathing.
Yeah. And I remember too, when I had posted on Instagram too, somebody who had like reposted it, put in like a warning for like like a sense of like dislocation, or I'm not remembering it properly, but that sort of sense of like being a little bit out of your body. And I was like, oh right, yeah, this can, this sort of has that within it, that sort of like in
The
and out
going and
feeling.
coming. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And so then another GIF here from the online component. So, so this is working with that same crumply paper situation as the second slide, but in a different way. So that the paper was crumpled and the text was printed, and then it's recrumpled in a different way and scanned into these different slides. And I think it ends up giving it a sort of different, like a different feeling to it, like almost sort of wave-like or watery. And and so sort of interesting to play around with this as a form a bit. I should also say for this show, I did also get a official Giphy account. So if you're interested in texting any of these GIFs to your friends because they are relevant in the text conversations that you're having, you can find them there. I'm sort of interested in ways of bringing this show into like all different parts of our lives, since it's not in a gallery space. Like, what other parts of our lives can we have art in? So that's that.
I love the fluid motion of that one, the water feeling.
Yeah, thanks. And then with this piece, so this is sort of going, I've been talking a lot about different ways that text is becoming illegible. This is looking more at like a traditional ink redaction. So redaction is how like lawyers block out portions of a document that they don't want to be released either to the public or to the other parties of a lawsuit. So back when I used to work for litigators in the early days, we did this using ink on paper. And I was always sort of interested in this way that the quality of the ink wasn't quite the same quality as the toner of the printout that I was marking out. So you'd have to do that and then re-photocopy it in order to completely obliterate that text. Otherwise you could sort of still see through the marker. I was thinking about that with this piece and sort of happy to discover that that same thing could happen with the marker and the letterpress there. So, it's like an attempt at blocking something out, but that fails, you can still read it. And then this piece is sort of taking that same impulse and pushing it a little bit further. And the text from this piece comes from something that I feel like I was hearing a lot more like in the early spring, at the beginning of the pandemic, of people saying, oh, when this is all over, I'll do X. And so the text here, by removing the over and using only when this is all, I think sort of speaks to that fact. I haven't heard people using that phrase as often. It just seems like maybe we are getting a little bit more accustomed to like living within this moment. So I wanted to do something that's a little more direct.
This one felt so much like a landscape to me. And I think we talked about that initially, how it's kind of growing from these words on this horizon line of words, right? And then just kind of a reflection kind of going, south of it. And then like all of the trees kind of growing north of it, kind of.
Yeah.
So it really felt hopeful to me, like it's growing, it's building into this kind of more organic form. So yeah, I kind of thought beyond the redaction and beyond, these kind of ink blots and started to see, it's like a Rorschach test or something, right? What do we see in each of these pieces? But
yeah, and I love that. I think it can sort of mean different things to different people, and that can be really great. Oops. And then And then this piece, sort of going back to that eraser technique, and it's on the silk paper again. And for this, each line of text was printed and then erased, and then I printed the next line of text and then erased that line of text. And and so sort of building this up, but it's also pushing back into the paper, because each time you erase on the silk paper, it pulls some more of the fibers away. So it's like it's building it up and taking it away at the same time. And for the content of this piece specifically, is sort of this like constant feeling of like the loss of the physical togetherness that we've had, and how that can like mimic the loss of an individual or the loss of a relationship, that these plans that we've made that then we can't go through with. And they're sort of, as we've gone through this year where so many things have changed, and maybe we've made plans and they've changed, that has been, with each landmark, you're sort of feeling things fresh, which I think is also just very much related to like any kind of grief experience, right? And that was something, again, like in March or so, I read this like really wonderful article, interview with David Kessler, who's like the grief expert. He's like the stages of grief guy. And that was such an interesting thing for me to start thinking about with this year, of how those things that we are experiencing with the pandemic can be related back to things that we know about grief. And it's given me sort of like a nice grounding for this work too. So
yeah, I love when we were talking about it too. It felt like, I think you said it's building up, and I misheard you, and I thought you had said building out, like it's almost like kind of building out towards me, and it's kind of starting to feel like it's coming off of the screen in a three-dimensional plane. So in a way, it feels, it's not moving obviously, but it starts to feel in that way like it's moving. Obviously, with the placement of the lettering and the text, that it's doing that as well. But the development of the value, where it starts to get darker, it starts to feel like it's coming out towards me.
Yeah.
And building out. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So then let's see, we have another GIF here. And this is sort of another approach to that wrinkly paper, but I'm sort of interested in seeing how different approaches to that wrinkling could feel a little bit different in terms of the motion there. And I think Michelle was asking me about this, like whether when I'm making these GIFs, if I go into them thinking like, oh, I want it to look a certain way, or whether I'm just sort of playing around. And it's really a little bit of each. I go into it with a certain sense of like, this is generally the composition I want, or I want a really dramatic movement or a less dramatic movement, but there isn't like a clear sense of exactly how that will work. I'll sort of play around with some things, make a bunch of different scans, put them together, see what's working. And so I end up with like scans related to pieces that just don't become part of the end animation, which is like a total mirror of how my overall studio practice works, where I will try things and some of it works and some of it doesn't. And there's some that just, end up becoming part of the process, and some that end up becoming finished pieces.
I think this one you said too was, like kind of like wind, like a windsock.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about like the composition, kind of the placement of, the lettering kind of being more on the top third of the composition, rather than the one that we saw kind of a few slides back that was more central, that felt more like water or a river or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I was sort of, I wanted to do something that felt a little more dramatic and windy and intense. So. And then this GIF is actually, this is printed on the thinnest paper yet. This is on Gompi paper, which is just like the thinnest possible tissue paper. And so I was really interested to see what that would do with this animation work, to see if I could make something that felt a little bit softer even than the other work. So that's where that ended up. And then I guess in continuing the other thoughts of like where digital work could go and how we can make a show that can be not in a gallery, but just sort of in different parts of your lives. I was interested in making this cell phone wallpaper that folks could download and have on their phones. I've been on my phone a lot. Also, distressingly, because of all of the analytics available, I have learned how many times I pick up my phone a day, which is like way more than I thought and way more than I would like it to be. But in thinking about that with this show, I was sort of like, what if every time I picked up my phone, it had some kind of other meaning, or it could pull me out of where I was, or maybe try and like, you know, just disrupt that experience or change it a little bit. So I made these two different phone wallpapers that are available for download on the website, just as sort of this other space where we can have art in our lives.
I love that. I have to like kind of turn my head to the side to see what's going on. And that the two phrases kind of combine together to almost abstract, you know, to form like a single line down the center. I always see figures in my work. I always tell my students that, you know, that just be careful, you know, how you're composing an image, because you're going to find faces and you're going to find people in these images. And, you know, you want to make sure that you're intentional with that. And I think with this one, it felt like a spine, you know, or even like a full figure within the composition, which I liked.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's also really interesting to me, just on a practical level, how this one like stops reading as text, even though it's like practically speaking very legible. Like it just becomes sort of a form in this interesting way. I was sort of excited about that. And I also, in terms of it as a cell phone wallpaper, like wanted to sort of deliberately place it in the middle of the screen, that part of the screen that you like touch the most, as this way of almost like trying to connect tactily with our phones. So, you know, obviously it's still the same screen, but we can put something there.
To have a discussion with yourself.
Yeah.
Check yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So I was also thinking about, in putting together this show, how it might be sort of interesting to go through my my practice leading up to this show and sort of talk about some historic work on how I like landed here, and particularly because this show is through Clark College, and I think it's sort of like an exciting thing for those of you who are watching for students to try and think about how the things that you're working on now will end up leading to other things down the road. It's always exciting for me when I get to see other artists' work and how it's evolved and changed, and how they've approached similar subjects in different ways throughout the years. So so these pieces are from my first letterpress series, which I worked on between 2009 and 2012. It's called The Time Wasting Experiment. And I made 80 pieces in all. They were all 5 by 5 inches, and I printed them in just huge unnumbered editions so that they could be sort of spread out however, you know, to basically whoever wanted them at the time. And it was like also this way of taking personal experiences and removing the part that felt like specific and private to me, to make it a little bit more general and something that I was like hoping other people could see themselves in. And obviously like that continues to be an interest for me now. So that was sort of a nice place to start, and also a fun way, I have to say, to like start a project, because at that time I was working on it a lot because I'd sort of feel like I would go into the studio and wouldn't get anything done. And then by taking my own wasted time and using it as like a material for art, it was a way of like turning that around, so I could feel like, well, even if I did something that I sort of wish I hadn't done, or I feel like I'm not getting anywhere, I can take that and use it to make something and hopefully sort of like turn this around. And it ends up also, I think, being a bit related to mindfulness, even though I wasn't thinking about it that way at that time. So. And then this piece is from a series that I made in 2012 called Over and Over. And there are a couple of pieces in this series, and with each of them, I repeated the same phrase over and over until I ran out of the physical letter forms to do so and was forced to stop. So it's a bit of an endurance test. It also is reflective of the fact that this was, you know, I just bought press and my own type and all these exciting things. And so I didn't have a lot of type. I had a lot less type than I had access to when I was in a group studio. I mean, I still do, but I have more than I did then. Um, and so it's also a way of like pointing to those limitations. Like I don't have a lot of type, but let's see how much type I have. And there's also like a little bit of a nerdy letterpress joke in there. So so the individual type forms are called sorts. So that idiom of being out of sorts comes from letterpress terminology. You can sort of imagine if you're trying to like write something and you run out of letter forms and you can't, that would be sort of annoying and you'd be out of sorts. And so it's also like, I think a little bit of a joke about that I'm making a situation in which I force myself to be out of sorts.
I love that. All the printmakers I know like hate to be out of sorts though. It's so funny.
Yeah.
So precise.
Well, yeah. If it's the project, it can be okay. And that's another way of sort of like looking at your limitations and trying to find ways to use the limitations as their own project and to just sort of like see what you can do with them, which is probably something all of us are thinking about a little bit more this year. So then this piece is a Silkscreen Monotype from the Durations series, which I worked on from 2010 to 2014. And when I returned to Silkscreen work, my background is in printmaking, but I didn't start letterpress work. This is my cat, he's also here. I didn't start letterpress work until a little bit later. So I returned to Silkscreen and had been working in letterpress and working in type and was interested in sort of continuing to work with text, but in a different medium. And then this piece is my first animated Gifs. So in 2014, I was invited to make a show for the online gallery Violet Strays, which did month-long exhibitions online that then didn't have an archive. So it was like this sort of similar approach to a physical gallery show. You've got to go and see it during the month and then it's gone. And at that point, I hadn't done any work that was digitally specific. I'd been making this work on paper and, you know, and I'd definitely been seeing some of my pieces on paper have these second lives on the internet, you know, mostly Tumblr at that time. But I hadn't made anything that was sort of like where the original piece would be digital. And because it was like an online space, I was interested in doing that. And so well, what is native to the internet? Gifs. And I started making this, and it was like a really exciting, like this ended up being a really exciting jumping off point for me in terms of thinking about like, not, I'm a printmaker, so I will just always make works on paper that will only exist on paper, and I will put those wherever they're going to be, and instead thinking about like, what's the space? What's the conditions for this work? How do I want it to live? What can I do in this particular space that might be a little bit new or exciting that I couldn't do in a different space? So, so then after that, I was invited to make a longer animation to show at Up4 Gallery in Portland for alternative printmaking methods show. And you can sort of see in this is a still from that animation. If you want to watch the whole thing, we'll put the Vimeo link in the chat. But this, you can sort of see in this piece that I'm starting to use the printing more as a drawing medium. You know, it's like it stopped being a static, repeatable text, but this frame itself is more of like more of a drawing. And then a little later that year, I had a show at Wolf Gallery in Portland and made both silkscreen monotypes and letterpress pieces for this show. And some of the letterpress pieces I turned into animations. And so the text for the letterpress pieces here comes from the website Newfork, which is a place for people to report UFO sightings that they have had. And so you can sort of search by date and place. And if you see a weird light in the sky, you can see if anybody else saw that same weird light in the sky. And so I found that website and I was reading these descriptions and I got really excited about the way that within these descriptions, people were having a really hard time describing what the experience that they'd had was, or maybe were like describing some kind of doubt that they'd had in their own experience. So I sort of started taking text from those pieces that related back to those feelings and turned it into this work, which is another thing that I really just sort of enjoy doing as a practice. I think it can be really exciting to use text that you haven't written, that you found. You can sort of, it can be like a nice approach and pull you out of yourself a little bit. And then in November 2016, I did an Instagram takeover for vignettes. And at that time, Instagram was chronological. So I was thinking about posting certain things at different times. So, you know, at the time of the sunrise where I was, or at the time when the sun was directly overhead, sort of trying to engage in the time-based nature of posting to Instagram. So also sort of exciting. And then I was, with this, it was sort of a show based around the Italo Calvino short story, A Sign in Space. And that too is like a little bit about moving through, sort of like about moving through a solar system and trying to find the same place. So locating yourself in time and space there. And then after that, this is just sort of a one-off piece, but that seemed a bit interesting to bring up because I feel like this piece has more of like a concrete poetry approach. I'm using the paper folds to almost mimic actual rays of light. And so, you know, starting to play with the paper a little bit in a way that I ended up going into a lot more with this show. And then back in 2017, Sarah Russell and I, who is here watching, hi Sarah, did a really exciting collaborative exhibition in Seattle. And I was thinking about this a bit in terms of the situation that we find ourselves in right now, because Sarah and I were each working on our own work for this show, but collaborating in terms of the theme and what we were thinking about. And we read the same books at the same time. And we're emailing with each other and sort of sharing work that we had finished as we finished it, but separated by space. She's in Seattle, I'm in Portland. And it was this like really exciting way to work and way to like think about a show, to be working on each on our own individual work, but to be making that process sort of collaborative. So sort of like something I've been thinking about more these days too, of like, how do I connect with people in other ways? How do I make this time, you know, how do I make this meaningful even when I'm far apart from people? And then in 2018, and Michelle mentioned this a little bit, I did this as part of this group temporary public exhibition in Seattle that was curated by Vignettes and Grandma Press. And that was also like a sort of transformative experience. I was going from working very small with this letterpress work to having that turned into these huge billboards, which was so overwhelming and exciting. And it also just like the experience of like approaching the show as a viewer and going up there to see not only my work, but the other work in the show was like really magical because, you know, the works were spread around the city of Seattle, and there was also audio works. And so it sort of started to feel like my whole life was part of this art exhibition, like by not having it enclosed in a gallery, but instead having it spread out around a city and something that I was interacting with in all of these different ways during a day just made all of the other experiences that I was having feel like very exciting and very meaningful, and like they were all part of this experience, even if it wasn't stuff directly related to the show. And so that ended up also being like this really exciting turning point and sort of thinking about like what can an art experience be, what can a show be, how do I want to like live within those things, you know. And again, like even though I'm making this letterpress work that's reproduced as a billboard, like what's a billboard, what do I want to do with this, what is this, like what's this mean, what's exciting about it to me? So that was like a really awesome experience.
I loved like the scale of these pieces, like the billboard pieces, and kind of going from that really tiny, just really you know, it's such a difficult thing, I think, going into a gallery and seeing a tiny piece on the wall, right? And like, you're not sure, you've always been taught going into a gallery, museum, like, don't get too close to the work. And so, you know, whenever I've seen your work in shows, it's been so small and it's almost like unapproachable in a way because it is so tiny. But seeing it at this like epic scale, you know, where there's billboards, you know, the billboard scale is just, it's so immersive and it's just so epic. I feel those ones I feel personally the most connected to, I feel like.
Yeah, it was so exciting. And also, I mean, I included that picture of me in front of the billboard just to try and like illustrate how incredibly stoked I was. Like it was overwhelming. And I think there's something really exciting about it. You know, when you put work out there that's like huge and in public, people have the opportunity to look at it without being observed looking at it, which is like the other thing that I think can get a little bit difficult about like going into a gallery, and it's a sort of small quiet space, and if you're going in there, you could be the only person in there aside from like the person who's like working for the gallery, and you can sort of feel like you're being watched having that experience or looking at the piece. And to put these things out and have them huge and in public, like you can have whatever response you want. No one is going to, you don't have the feeling of those like eyes on you watching you have that
Yeah,
experience.
you get to experience it the way that you want, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you come to it as you are.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and then I had a solo show at Wolf Gallery that year as well, and I was looking at sort of um, performativity and like performativity of your own identity, and using text from the TV show The Bachelor. And I think that sort of ends up playing like thematically into the, you know, what we were talking about with the billboards too, that like a lot of what I was interested in with that show and um, and this body of work was that sense of like how we do things differently based on feeling like the eyes of people on us, and how just that changes things, right? So these are some images from that. And then last spring, I got invited by Blake Shell here in Portland to work on this project for Design Week that was called Amplifier, and it was like this sort of exciting multisensory installation in a hotel room. So I made all of the visual elements of this, some animations, some vinyl text, these blankets, and Marcus Fisher made this like beautiful immersive sound experience, and Emily Mistel of the bar Hey Love developed like a cocktail just for this. And so people would come into the room, be given this cocktail to drink, and sit there and just like have this whole multisensory experience. And that too, like the limitations of doing something in a hotel room are sort of extreme. Like you can't put a thumbtack in the wall even, like absolutely everything that you do has to be completely removable by the end of the night. And so it was like sort of exciting to have those limitations and to just be like, well, what else can be like a material? What else can this work be that can fit into this sort of specific space? And then yeah, last summer, I was sort of interested in doing more of this public work after having that exciting experience with Alone. And so I did a project that was supported by RAC in Portland last summer. It went from, there were 12 pieces that spanned 25 miles from Tigard to Gresham to Hillsborough to North Portland, just sort of spread all across the city. And the title came from this really wonderful passage of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet about sort of accepting the fact that we are solitary in nature and taking that as a starting point, and that if you do that, if you're actually able to like accept our solitary nature, that it will feel like overwhelming in the same way that it would feel overwhelming for you to suddenly right now find yourself like on the top of a mountaintop having this like intense sublime experience, which I've just been like thinking about that passage more and more, what, you know, how solitary we really are. And then last fall, I published this book with volumes that I've been working on for a little more than a year here. And so I was sort of interested in like taking the book. It's a paperback book that is a piece of art. So it's not like an art book. It's like a book as a piece of art. And so it's like really deliberately a paperback that you can like carry with you, throw in your bag, look at like for a little bit when you're on the bus, just sort of like have as this art object that can follow you around for like those in between moments of your day. So that was sort of exciting to think about like what it is that I like about reading and books and try and translate that into like its own art piece. Again, like trying to think about what the limitations are, but what like the expansive nature of those limitations are. I was also really lucky to have just a totally beautiful introduction to this book written by Jennifer Rabin. And then after that book, I really fortuitously got invited to be the featured poet in the winter 2019 issue of the Buckman Journal. And so I'd already been thinking about like what a publication is, how I hold these things, but the format of the Buckman Journal is just like different from the format of the book that I've been working on. And so it like allowed me to play around with some of those same ideas, but in a different way. And they let me do a fold out, which was super fun. So that was sort of an exciting thing to have come up. And then this summer, I participated in Lonesome at the Montalvo Art Center in San Jose, or it was put on by the Montalvo Art Center, and it was around the California Bay Area. So that was like another exciting experience of having work up in public places and like working with billboards again, which are just such an exciting medium to work with.
If I had had more money for our project, I totally would have gotten you a couple billboards, because I just am so in love with them. Yeah.
They're really an interesting medium to work with as an artist. Like it's not like you're just putting things right out there into the world in this way that like art normally isn't. Although I will say, I sort of feel like what we've done with this, it's totally influenced by my thoughts about like what a billboard can do, but I'm just trying to do that same thing, but like in your home. So I hope it's working. I hope that like you're getting that sort of exciting feeling of like my home and my phone and all of these other places can be the art show. So
Alyson, we got ours yesterday in the mail. Joel got one and I got one, and I was so excited, even though I stuffed all those envelopes with you. So, I mean, it's funny that even me, like in the mail. Oh, hi, Joel. That, yeah, it felt very much like really fun and really exciting, even though I knew exactly what I was getting in the mail. Just to get something in the mail is a really lovely thing.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so good. I did an art show this summer that was like also an art exchange by mail. And I feel like having those pieces come in the mail for me and like getting whatever, some envelope or like a little package and just having like no clue what was going to be in it was such a great experience over the summer. Like everything had sort of like been having that like Groundhog Day feeling of like, I just keep repeating the same day over and over again. I'm not sure that time is passing, what's going on. But then having that like surprise was really, yeah, it was really good. So when we were talking about this show, I was like, well, how can I do something like that for other people?
Yeah, it's a little gift, you know?
Yeah.
You made gifts and gifts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should say, gosh, that show was called Producing Space, and it was collaboratively put together by Outback Art House and National Monument Press. And there's documentation online if you want to see all of the fun things that I got in the mail from people.
Cool.
So sort of close with this image of the sticker that just went out in the mail. I hope you've received yours, and this isn't a spoiler. Hope to have the surprise. You know, it's sort of returning to this like same approach with redaction, only a different physical attention to that redaction. I'm using letterpress ink instead of a marker and getting a little bit of that like paper texture coming through. But you can still sort of, you know, again, you can still sort of see through the attempted redaction and read it. And then you know, it also sort of, not only that, but by having it printed twice and like the same parts redacted that are visible, you can totally tell what it says behind the redaction. It's like, it's obvious. And I sort of like was thinking a bit about like a lot of like the memes that I've been seeing around people just feeling like lonely and isolated. And there's this like funny way that we're all connecting about our loneliness right now, but it's, you know, like that can even be a bit of a flattening of the actual experience. Like we are all having different experiences of this same pandemic, and, you know, the way that it's changed our lives has been totally different for everyone. And so it's sort of, you know, I guess what I'm hoping for with this is this sense of like the feeling that there are some things that we're sharing, but there's not like a total way to understand what anyone else is really experiencing. And that's not specific to this year or the pandemic or anything else, you know, that's just like forever. So there's a bit of, you know, there's a bit of a tension there. Like we can connect, but there's limits to that. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alyson. This is amazing. I think we'll probably take questions now. If anybody has any questions about Alyson's work.
And you can use the chat too if you're shy to speak. That's, anything's fine.
And I'm going to share a few of these links that Alyson was talking about, in case anybody wants those references.
Yeah.
It looks like Jake said, could you talk a bit about scale?
Oh yeah, they're really small. So the press that I have, the letterpress that I have, is a Chandler and Price Pilot, which is a tabletop letterpress. And the printable area of that is like a maximum of about like 9 by 12 or so. And so a lot of this work is like really very tiny to begin with. And I think that was also sort of why it's been exciting to me to work in these other kinds of reproductions where I'm able to make something small and then change the scale of it or do something a little bit different. But yeah, like thinking back to, or like circling back to those billboards, like all of the letterpress pieces that turned into those billboards, which are 10 by 22 feet, are all like, you know, whatever, between like 3 by 5 or 4 by 6 or something. Like they're real tiny to begin with, and then just scanned high res and printed up by the vinyl companies.
Lots of questions. Let's go to Katharina in the chat. She said, what typefaces do you own? And can you talk more about your press and studio? And then we'll get to Angelia after that.
Yeah, sure. So I own maybe 20-ish typefaces, and then there's some that I just use all the time. And I find that I really like typefaces that are traditionally used for printing the interior text for books. Like everything sort of like goes back to reading in that way. So my like most commonly used favorite typefaces are Caslin, and then this summer, and with a lot of the work in this show, I got sort of into Jansen, which is just like gorgeous.
Cool. Angelia, did you have a couple questions?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say I love this. I feel like it's a direct nod to kind of like mental health too, and like awareness of mental health. And like it really speaks to like me, especially a person like having anxiety and like feeling that connection or feeling like I'm not alone. And so yeah, it's just I absolutely love it. It's very emotional for me, but it's also like it has some sense of hope. And so I really enjoy that. So I just wanted to say that. But my question is your technique. So do you feel like you find your technique through trial and error? Do you have like a specific technique in your head that you want to try and then try to execute it? Like maybe a little bit more, I'm interested in your creative process and like how you find these ways to do that.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much. That's like really good to hear. And I think like a lot of it for me too like I was talking about mindfulness a little bit, there's something nice about like finding a way to describe a thing that you're feeling, and like that itself can be really like cathartic and just like sort of the thing that can turn things around, just having a way of feeling like you've expressed something properly. So for techniques, I tend to play around with things a lot, and I think I sort of like end up with like in my head this library of techniques. Like something will go wrong and I'll look at it and go like, oh, but there's something in this thing that was a disaster that's sort of interesting that I could use again in the future. And then I'm always sort of like collecting these phrases to work with, and like, so they'll hang around for a little bit, and then, you know, usually at some point it'll come together of like, oh, this phrase should be done in this way, or I'll try it like this and then I'll try it like that, and sort of see what it's going to be. But a lot of it's trial and error, you know, or not even trial and error, just like an error that then I want to repeat. Yeah. I feel like, and the other thing about it, I feel like I'm sort of interested in trying to notice things about like how I read, or what things look like when other types of mistakes happen, like photocopier mistakes, or like printing mistakes, or scanning mistakes, or you know, like weird things formatting themselves on your screen, or things being cut off in awkward ways. Like it's just yeah, I think my approach in general is to just try and like be noticing what things lead to something that feels sort of interesting for me, and where maybe the line between things being legible and not are, or what a specific type of like movement or action can mean, and how that can like either support or undermine a phrase or complicate it.
I love that you're kind of talking about failure, you know, in the middle
Yeah.
of all of that. You're really talking about failure, and you're talking about things not quite working out exactly as planned, or the communication that you intended didn't quite get across exactly right. And every human has experienced that, you know, in their lives. And so obviously it's a very universal human thing, but I think it's also just something that's just so lately feeling like more and more difficult, I think, to communicate exactly how we're feeling, because this is all so new. And so I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there when you're talking about failure, when you're talking about like noticing things that aren't quite, you know, coming across as intended, and kind of really blowing them up and considering them and questioning them and kind of picking them apart. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And that's like, I mean, that's like the classic thing about text messages and emails, right? That everybody has like miscommunications in them, because it's really hard to convey what it is you mean by what you're saying, unless like you know somebody really well. And even if you do, there's like places where that goes awry. And I think that's one of those things, like we think about language as being like really some kind of like concrete, there's one truth, language means what language means, but like it's all totally interpretation, and there's like a lot of failure in there too.
I know. I think about that a lot. Like, I think we often think about words as being these solid, concrete things that only mean what the dictionary tells us. But then there's kind of this colloquial way that we use them oftentimes, and in different cultures and different societies, like everybody uses these words differently. And from person to person, neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city, you know, there's different ways that we use words. And so communication is so difficult. It's really hard to get the right thing that we're thinking and feeling across to people. And words are not complete, you know, they're not the whole thing. So
yeah.
just
Oh,
one
totally.
tool.
Totally. Yeah. So very interested, like I'm super interested in failure in general, and then also sort of interested in like phrases that can have multiple meanings, and like ways that things can go wrong, or even just like not even go wrong, like things can have multiple meanings, and all those meanings can be true, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think Jared had a question. Jared Stritzfer. Are you still here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you turn up your volume a little bit, Jared? You sound like you're far away.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Yeah.
Have you ever tried experimenting with different fonts, like the big fancy medieval fonts or more modern like graffiti style fonts before?
Yeah. So I have some like of that sort of like classic like Old English style. Gosh, and I'm completely forgetting the real name for those fonts right now. Regardless, I have some of those, and I've done some interesting like tests with them, and never quite come up with anything that was finished because they're so ornate and difficult to read themselves. Actually, just as a quick aside that maybe people appreciate, when I bought my type cabinet, it came with like some type, and one of them was a 6-point of that sort of like gothic-y Old English style font, and all the sorts were all mixed up. And so I had to like literally print every single one of them to see what letter it was, because the typefaces are backwards and they're so scripty that being that size and backwards, I couldn't even tell what letter was what. So there's something like really interesting there about that. And graffiti style stuff too, like same thing. It's really like ornate and decorative and like doing something really interesting all on its own that's like already starting to play with like legibility and like a little bit harder to read. And I haven't particularly done anything with it, but I'm super interested in like the possibilities of all of those types of things. Like I think there's a lot that those kinds of fonts can do that's like similar to my interests. Totally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions for Alyson? Angelia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so you were talking about the different typefaces and stuff. Have you ever tried mixing different ones? So like doing some with this sort of like I call it a typewriter text, because that's what it reminds me of, is someone on a typewriter. And maybe doing a few of the letters like in a different font, or is that really hard to do on a letterpress?
It's not hard to do if they are the same size. Everything is sort of like locked up into these blocks of type. Everything is physical and like locked up into these blocks, and then needs to be secured into, it's called the chase of the letterpress, but it's like this little metal like whatever picture frame type thing that then goes into the press. And it's funny, I haven't played around with that. I don't know, just like not wild enough.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day. It's an interesting thing. Like I think that, and I've certainly, I've also like certainly bought typefaces that I found like really beautiful and exciting, thinking like, yeah, I'm gonna work with this and do something really cool. And the fact that the typeface itself is like really exciting to me almost like throws off what I can do with it. I think I like working with these like sort of like more book-like fonts because they feel almost like, I mean, not that they're not beautiful, they're very beautiful on their own, but that they almost like feel like a little bit more like blank in a certain way, and that when you do something that looks a little bit more like it's going to be like signage or something, like somebody's like logo or something, that the weight of that feels really like different to me. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Next year, maybe I'll be doing all of these things.
It looks like Wendy in the chat has a question. What was the first very fibrous paper you used?
Oh gosh. Well, for a while I was printing mostly on like sort of like heavyweight European printmaking papers, a lot of like harsh stuff like that. And there used to be this really incredible art store in Southeast Portland that's gone now, but they had this really great selection of just like more rare Japanese papers. And then also when SGC, the like International Printmaking Conference, came to Portland in 2016, there was just like a wild assortment of papers there. And I feel like it was around that time where I was sort of just like starting to play around with what different papers I could use, and maybe like using some that are a little bit harder to print on or harder to work with.
Nice. All right. Anybody else have any questions? We'll start wrapping things up, I think. Maybe one or two more if you have them. Anybody else? Feel free to use the chat if you want to. Angelia, do you want to do the last one? Do the honor?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, please.
No, it's great.
Great.
I just had one more question, kind of more relating to the pandemic. I was seeing like your kind of like history or like, you know, your past stuff. And do you feel like you are more inspired since the pandemic because your stuff kind of deals with connection and memory? Do you feel like you're more tapped into that? Or have you been struggling like creatively? Like, I feel like either people are black and white in this. Either they're like thriving and they're doing a lot of introspection, or they're like struggling to get, like Michelle was saying earlier, to get those feelings across and to like, how do you feel since then?
You know, it's been a really interesting thing. And I feel like particularly in March, and I think this was probably pretty common for a lot of artists, but like in March, I had this feeling of like looking back at old work and just being like, what is this? Did I make this for myself right now? How did I know? Like, what's going on? But it's been, I think, sort of harder to work than it was like last year. And I think that part of that for me is like a lot of the subject matter that I've been working with for many years is like related to a lot of these same things of like loneliness and uncertainty and sort of like these sort of in-between feelings that are just like such an overwhelming part of everyday life right now. And one of the things that I didn't realize about how I approached working on these things before having this experience that we are in right now is that it was really nice to be able to like jump into thinking about those things and then take a break from it, and without being able to like necessarily, I mean, there's just like there's been a lot going on, and there's a lot that is really, really uncertain right now, and a lot that's really changing. And you know, I think it's maybe like harder to think about those things as abstract concepts when there's like no relief from it, which obviously isn't to say that I'm not making work. Like, here's this show, but as Michelle knows, like she was very supportive throughout this, and I think it was really important for me to like have that in the process of like making this, to have this person who was like, who I was talking about all these things with and working on it with, because it's been, yeah, I think it's like been a little bit harder. And it's true, like I think some people are finding out some interesting things about how they work. Like I've always worked well in solitude. I've like haven't worked in so much in shared studio space for the last like 10 years or so. Like I love working that way, but I just can't like live my whole life in solitude. So I don't know, you know, all that's to say, yeah, maybe it's been a little bit harder to get things done, but when I do get something that like feels like the thing, it might be a little bit more like personally meaningful to me. I think everybody, like most artists, have like that weird relationship with their own work where there's some pieces that they connect to a lot and others that don't, and that maybe like in this time I'm feeling like a little bit more personally connected to my own work in that way. So
I felt like working with you was so amazing and so just awesome to kind of sit and talk through some of these ideas and to bounce things back and forth. And I think having this show coming up gave me hope in general, and also direction and kind of focus through the summer and these last couple weeks since school started and everything. And we chatted about this yesterday, I think, but just kind of, you know, thinking about your work in relation to kind of, you know, feeling so lonely and feeling like you're kind of alone in the world, but then, you know, you read these things and hearing you also, your voice kind of come through them and say that you are also feeling alone and you're grieving, and similar feelings. And in that loneliness, we are connected. And those moments are the ones where, like, every time I would look back at your work, every time I would repost it somewhere, I would just feel like I'm not alone. Even though you're saying in these words, you know, you're alone, but I'm not alone, because at least Alyson is there with me. At least somebody else in the world feels exactly the same as I do right now. And that was so refreshing, and it's still refreshing, which is why I think that this work is, it's timely of the now, but I think it's also going to extend, and you'll be able to build off of this body of work for years to come. Really fabulous. Thank you so much for coming, Alyson. This is just amazing.
Well, thank you for having me and for putting together this show and inviting me to work on this. It's been really, really wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone. And if you want to check out more, if you want to check out the website, we are again at archergallery.space. Please continue checking back for art talks, exhibitions, events, and things like that. We'll have workshops coming up. They're all open to the public and free. So, so please keep tuning in. And again, archergallery.space. Thank you again to everybody for coming. Thanks to Alyson for being here. So have a lovely day, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye. Alyson, did you want to hop off and do our own chat?
Sure, sounds good. I was just reading through the chats to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Totally.
Oh yeah, Jared, if you're still here, yeah, the forest fires with the GIF and the spookiness. I'm into that.
He's still here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Awesome. So I'm going to end this one, and then we can hop out, and maybe I'll send you a new link, Alyson.